10 years ago, my husband stood right where I'm standing now, on the north side of this porch, hat in his hands, looking out over a field that used to belong to hope instead of rail lines. He didn't raise his voice. John never did. He just said, "Mary, land is meant to be lived on, not defended like a fortress." I remember the way the wind pushed against his coat that evening. I remember how I didn't look at him when I answered. I said something about roots, about legacy, about how a Caldwell doesn't walk away from soil that has his name in it. What I meant was simpler than that. I was afraid that if we left this ranch, we would discover we weren't strong without it. Afraid our son wouldn't come back if there wasn't a fixed place for him to return to. Afraid that if I loosened my grip, everything would scatter. John died the following winter. Not from hardship. Not from drama. Just from years catching up to a man who'd worked too hard for too long. Our boy left the next spring. And I stayed. You might understand that kind of staying. Men our age were raised to believe that holding the line was a virtue. That endurance was proof of character. That if something was yours, you kept it even if it cost you. I told myself I was protecting what mattered. That was 10 years ago. This morning, I stood at the same porch rail, a contract laid out on the kitchen table behind me. A railroad representative had driven out before sunrise. Clean boots. Polite smile. Papers in a leather case. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "we're expanding north. It would be easier for you to sell now. Winters out here aren't kind to 82-year-old women." He wasn't wrong. I signed nothing. Yet. The wind has a different sound these days. It whistles through fence boards that need replacing. It rattles a roof that remembers stronger hands than mine. And then something struck the porch railing hard enough to make me turn. A bald eagle. Full grown. Wings wide as a barn door. I've watched them for years, a pair nesting in the tall cottonwood near the north field. They don't come close to the house. Not unless something's wrong. She landed heavy. Not graceful like usual. And in her talons, she carried a small, trembling bundle of feathers. An eaglet. I could see right away one wing wasn't right. Not broken clean, but bent. Hurt. She didn't scream. Didn't threaten. She just stood there. Looking at me. Now I've lived long enough to know animals don't make moral gestures. They follow instinct. Hunger. Safety. Territory. But there's a look that passes between living creatures when something deeper is happening. And she held my eyes the way my son once did, waiting for an answer I hadn't decided to give. "You picked the wrong house," I told her. My voice sounded older than I felt. The wind pressed against us both. Dust swirled around the porch steps. The railroad man's truck was still visible down the road, a small shape fading toward town. Behind me on the table, security. Warmth. An end to long winters alone. In front of me, a wild thing asking for help without asking at all. You'd think the choice would be simple. It wasn't. 10 years ago, when my son said he wanted to leave for the coast, I told him, "If you go, don't expect this place to wait unchanged." I thought I was teaching him commitment. What I was teaching him was that love here came with conditions. I stepped closer to the railing. The eaglet shifted weakly. The mother didn't move. "Why me?" I asked her. Maybe what I meant was, why now? The railroad will cut that north field first. That cottonwood stands right where the survey flags were planted. I saw them yesterday, bright orange markers like little warnings in the dirt. If I sell, the tree goes. If I don't sell, I fight men with contracts and clocks on their side. If I held this bird, I'd tie myself tighter to land I may not keep. At 82, you start to measure choices differently. Not in years. In weight. I reached out slowly. The mother eagle shifted her talons but didn't strike. That told me something. Trust isn't loud. It's a quiet extension of risk. I took the eaglet into my hands. Light. Fragile. Warmer than I expected. It made a small sound, not a cry. Just breath. And standing there with that life resting against my palms, I felt something I hadn't allowed in years. Not pride. Not stubbornness. Fear. Because I realized I had once held my son the same way, small, depending on me, and somewhere along the line, I confused guiding with controlling. The porch creaked under my weight as I turned back toward the house. The contract was still on the table. Sunlight through the window lit the signature line like a clean, easy road. Sell. Be safe. Let the world move forward without you. Or stay. Risk more winters. Risk loss. Risk being wrong again. The eagle remained on the railing. Watching. Not demanding. Just present. 10 years ago, I chose land over listening. Today, holding that broken-winged bird, I understood something I hadn't let myself see. You can defend a home so fiercely that nothing living feels free inside it.
You can defend a home so fiercely that nothing living feels free inside it.
I stood there a long time. Nothing happened. The railroad didn't return. The wind didn't change direction. The eagle didn't bow in gratitude. But inside me, something shifted, small, like the first lift of wings testing air. And for the first time since my boy rode away, I wasn't thinking about holding on. I was thinking about what it might mean to let something fly, and still believe it could come back. By noon that day, I had already imagined life without the ranch. Not as tragedy. Not as defeat. Just a smaller life. A quieter one. A rented room in town. A stove that didn't need chopping wood. Neighbors close enough to hear if I fell. You get to a certain age and comfort starts looking like wisdom. The eaglet rested near the hearth, wrapped in old flannel. Its breathing had steadied some, though the injured wing lay crooked against its body like a question it couldn't answer. Outside, the cottonwood stood against a pale sky. The survey flags remained planted around it, bright and unashamed. That tree would be cut first. I stepped into the yard with the contract folded in my back pocket. The paper felt heavier than it should have. When my son left 10 years ago, he stood in this same yard. I remember he didn't argue much by the end. He just said, "You don't trust me to make my own mistakes." At the time, I told myself that was childish. Now, standing where he once stood, I felt the echo of it. The mother eagle circled once and landed high in the cottonwood. She didn't approach the porch this time. She stayed at a distance. Watching. The eaglet stirred inside the house. I could hear its faint movement through the open window. I walked to the tree, stopping beneath its branches. I wanted to say something, some declaration that I would fix this. But nature doesn't negotiate. The wind shifted, and one of the survey flags snapped against the trunk. Bright orange against old bark. It looked wrong. I pulled it free. Another remained. Then I heard tires on gravel. The railroad representative again. Prompt. Measured. Predictable. He stepped out with that same calm expression. "Mrs. Caldwell, I hope you've reconsidered. These offers don't improve with time." I studied him carefully this time. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't mocking. He was practical, which somehow made it worse. You planning to take the north field first? I asked. That's where the line maps best, he replied. And the cottonwood? He hesitated just long enough. It would need to be cleared. Cleared. Such a tidy word. He stepped closer. You've done enough out here. Let the next chapter begin somewhere easier. That sentence settled in my chest like cold iron. Easier. When my husband was dying, he once said, you can spend your whole life fighting the world, Mary, and never notice you're also fighting the people who love you. I didn't answer him then either. The representative handed me the pen. Friday, he reminded. I took it. Not to sign. Just to feel its weight. And at that exact moment, the eaglet let out a sharp, unsteady cry from inside the house. Not loud, but urgent. The man glanced toward the sound. Wild things adapt. Or they don't. Something in me tightened. I turned and walked back to the porch, leaving him standing in the yard. I lifted the crate and carried it outside beneath the cottonwood so the mother eagle could see. The eaglet wobbled upright, testing balance on unsteady legs. The mother eagle did not swoop down. She did not interfere. She simply remained. Allowing. That's when the realization struck me harder than the wind. I never allowed my son to wobble. I steadied him before he could fail. Corrected him before he could learn. Decided what was safe before he could decide for himself. I called it protection. He called it control. And maybe he was right.
Oh, this is story. When I listen here, I want to cry.
The representative cleared his throat behind me. Mrs. Caldwell? I looked at the eaglet stretching its injured wing. It trembled, then steadied. It might fall from that tree one day. It might not survive winter. Nothing here was guaranteed. But the mother eagle was not trying to prevent struggle. She was preparing it for sky. And there, holding that pen, I finally understood something I hadn't allowed myself to admit. If I sell this land because I am afraid of being alone, I am still making decisions out of fear. If I keep it only to prove I was right all along, I am still choosing pride. The real question wasn't about railroad tracks. It was this. Can I protect something without imprisoning it? The representative stepped onto the porch. Your answer? I looked at the contract. Then at the cottonwood. Then at the eaglet, who made another effort to stand without collapsing. I set the pen on the railing. Not forcefully. Deliberately. I'm not ready, I said. He studied me a long second. Progress doesn't pause forever. Neither does regret, I replied. He left without another word. The survey flag still stood in the field. The railroad still had power. Winter was still coming. Nothing changed on the outside. But inside, something shifted permanently. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't trying to control the outcome. I was trying to become the kind of person who could let something fly. And trust that if it chose to return, it would be because it wanted to. That night, the storm came down like it had unfinished business. Not loud at first. Just pressure in the air. The kind you feel in your bones before the first board starts to shake. By midnight, the windows rattled hard enough to remind me that this house, like me, has survived more on stubbornness than certainty. The eaglet lay in the crate near the stove, but its breathing wasn't steady anymore. Each rise of its chest looked like work. The injured wing twitched now and then, as if pain had rhythm of its own. Outside, the cottonwood bent deep under the wind. I couldn't see the mother eagle anywhere. And that's when doubt stopped whispering and started speaking plain. What if she doesn't return? What if she trusted the wrong person? What if I did? There is a moment in the dark, especially when you've lived long enough, when your past sits down beside you uninvited. 10 years ago, after my son rode out and the dust settled behind him, I told myself, he'll learn. The world will teach him what I couldn't. What I didn't admit was this. I never gave him the chance to fall while I was still there to steady him. I controlled the lesson instead of letting him live it. The wind slammed the shutters so hard I flinched. Inside the crate, the eaglet suddenly thrashed, lost its balance, and struck the side with a dull sound. It let out a sharp, desperate cry. Not a small one. Not weak. A cry that cut through the storm and straight into my chest. For a split second, just a split second, I thought about carrying it back out to the base of the cottonwood. Returning it to its world. Letting nature take responsibility again. Because helping something wild is one thing. Failing it is another. I lifted the crate. Walked toward the door. The wind forced it inward before I could open it fully. Cold air rushed through the house. The cottonwood swayed violently. And in that violent swing, I saw what would happen if I set the crate beneath that tree tonight. The eaglet would not be learning to fly. It would be learning to disappear. That realization stopped me colder than the wind. 10 years ago, when my son said, "You don't trust me to make my own mistakes," I answered him with rules. Tonight, I almost answered this bird with avoidance. There's a difference between letting something struggle and abandoning it. I closed the door. Set the crate back down. And I sat on the floor beside it. For the next hour, the storm didn't care what I decided. It kept pounding the boards. The eaglet grew quieter. Too quiet. Then came the silence. Not wind. Not wings. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that makes a house feel like a church. I leaned forward slowly. Its chest barely moved. I waited. Counted seconds I didn't want to count. This is the part no one tells you about responsibility. Sometimes you stand there wondering if your best effort still wasn't enough. My throat tightened. I whispered, "Don't quit." And I don't know if I was speaking to the bird or to myself. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, a tremor in its side. A breath. Weak, but there. Relief doesn't explode at my age. It settles slowly, like weight lifting one layer at a time. Outside, the storm began to break. And then I heard it. A sharp call above the wind. The mother eagle. She hadn't fled the storm. She had waited it out. Trusted timing instead of panic. I carried the crate onto the porch as dawn pushed gray light across the field. The cottonwood looked battered but standing. The mother eagle landed high in its branches. She didn't rush down. Didn't demand her young back. She watched me. And something in that stillness struck deeper than the storm had. She trusted me through the worst of it. Not because I was strong, but because I stayed.
Sometimes I'm thinking this is a story about my mom's. But in it modern world.
Tom rode up mid-morning, concern written plain on his face. "North fence is half down," he said. "Railroad men are coming tomorrow to reassess." Of course they were. Pressure doesn't wait for recovery. "If you don't sign soon, they'll reduce the offer again," he added carefully. The cottonwood creaked overhead. The eaglet stirred at the sound of its mother's call, trying again to push upright. It managed 2 steps this time before faltering. But it tried. That's when I felt the true weight of the choice in front of me. If I sell now, I can say I did it for security. If I stay, I might lose everything. But if I walk away from this storm, from this fragile life that endured because someone stayed beside it, then I am still the woman who leaves when fear rises. And I'm tired of being that woman. Nothing changed out there. The railroad still owns its maps. The fence still lies broken. Winter still waits. But the storm passed, and I didn't run. And maybe, just maybe, that's where strength actually begins. The next morning, the sound of hammer-on wood traveled farther than any conversation in this valley. It was just me and the broken north fence, boards split, posts loosened, wires slack like a tired promise. I worked slow, because at 82, speed is the first thing you trade for endurance. But I worked steady, because steady still means something out here. You might think I was fixing a fence. What I was really doing was proving to myself that I hadn't given up. The cottonwood stood a little worse for the storm, branches scraped and twisted, but upright. High above, the mother eagle watched without moving. The eaglet's small shape was tucked close, safer now, stronger than it had been 3 nights ago. I kept glancing at the road. Not because I expected my son. Because I expected men with paper. Around midday, they arrived, 2 riders and a wagon, and behind them, the railroad representative in his clean coat that didn't belong to dust. He stepped down like he owned the ground he was standing on, even if he hadn't paid for it yet. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, polite as ever. "I'm afraid we need to speak." Tom had warned me they'd be back to reassess. Still, seeing them in my yard made my chest tighten. It wasn't fear of violence. It was fear of being pushed into the same old corner where the easiest answer wears the mask of reason. He nodded toward the fence. "Hard work for someone your age." "I'm not doing it for my age," I replied. "I'm doing it because it's broken." He opened his leather case and took out a new sheet. "Your previous offer has changed." Of course it had. He held the paper out like a lifeline. "Sign today," he said. "Town is safer. Warmer. You won't have to do this anymore." He wasn't lying. That's what made it dangerous. I looked at the signature line. I imagined that warm stove in town. I imagined sleep without wind testing the windows. I imagined someone else fixing fences. Someone else making choices. And then I imagined the cottonwood cut down, the nest gone, the sky suddenly empty above a land that used to mean something. He followed my gaze. "The tree is an obstacle. Wildlife relocates." I didn't answer right away. I set the hammer down carefully, wiped my hands on my apron, and stepped closer to the paper. For one heartbeat, I wanted to sign. Not because I believed in their progress. Because I was tired of being alone. That's a shameful truth to admit, but you're old enough to know it's a common one. Then, above us, the mother eagle shifted. The eaglet, awkward, stubborn, made its way toward the edge of the nest and tried to stand against the wind. It wobbled. Nearly tipped. Every part of me wanted to rush forward, to do something, anything, to stop the fall before it happened. But the mother eagle didn't move. She didn't rescue it from the attempt. She stayed close enough to matter, and far enough to let it learn. And something in me finally snapped into place. That was the difference between love and control. I turned back to the representative. "You know why I'm still here?" I asked. He lifted his eyebrows. "Because you're proud." I shook my head. "Because I was wrong once. And I've been paying for it ever since." He looked impatient now, like my honesty was wasting his schedule. I lifted the paper from his hand, not to sign it, just to feel it. And I said the words I had avoided for 10 years. My son left because I treated this place like a chain. The air went quiet around us. Not because the world changed, because I finally told the truth out loud.
That's hard to admit. Not many parents say that out loud.
The representative's voice softened, almost kind. Then let it go. Isn't that what you want? I looked at the cottonwood again. Letting go didn't mean abandoning. It meant changing how I held on. I handed the paper back to him. I'm not signing today, I said. And if your men come for that tree, they'll have to look me in the eye while they do it. He stared at me a moment longer than he meant to. Friday is still Friday, he said. I know, I answered. And regret is still regret. He walked back to his wagon, and the riders followed. Dust rose behind them and settled into the same ruts it always had. Nothing happened outwardly, no shouting, no miracle, no sudden rescue. Just a decision. I picked up the hammer again and drove the next nail into the fence post until it held. Above, the mother eagle spread her wings, not in threat, not in triumph, just in quiet ownership of the sky. And for the first time, I understood what I needed to become. Not the woman who clutches what she loves until it breaks. The woman who stays steady, honest, so what she loves can choose to return. 3 days passed. Friday came without ceremony. No thunder. No dramatic sunrise. Just a colder wind and the kind of stillness that makes you aware of every sound your boots make on wooden boards. The railroad men did not arrive at dawn. That unsettled me more than if they had. Waiting is harder than fighting. The eaglet had grown stronger. Not healed completely, the wings still carried weakness, but it stood longer now. Watched the horizon. Listened to its mother's calls with more urgency. There's something about watching a young thing gather strength that humbles you. You realize growth doesn't ask permission. It just keeps trying. Tom rode in just after breakfast. They'll be here by noon, he said quietly. Survey crew first. Then the rest. Of course. Paper first. Steel later. I nodded. Fence will hold another winter. He hesitated before asking the question that mattered. And you? I'll hold too, I said. But inside, I wasn't as steady as I sounded. By late morning, I stood beneath the cottonwood alone. The eaglet edged closer to the rim of the nest. Wind tugged at its feathers. The mother eagle stood a branch above, close enough to intervene, far enough to allow. And I saw it clearly then. All my life I mistook holding on for loving well. But love that cages is just fear wearing a noble face. I heard hooves on gravel. 3 men this time. Including the representative. They dismounted without hostility. Just business. Mrs. Caldwell, he began, this is the final review. He gestured toward the field. We'll need to mark tree clearance. There it was. Not threat. Not anger. Procedure. I stepped forward until I stood between them and the cottonwood. You'd think I'd feel heroic. I didn't. I felt tired. And very aware that I could lose this land by sunset. If you clear that tree, I said, you're not just removing lumber. You're removing something living. He answered calmly. Progress requires sacrifice. That word again. Sacrifice. I almost laughed at the irony. 10 years ago, I sacrificed a relationship to preserve property. Now I was being asked to sacrifice property to preserve, what exactly? Memory? Redemption? Above us, the eaglet shifted again. It spread its injured wing, awkward, uneven. And then it did something neither the storm nor I had forced it to do. It jumped. Not far. Not graceful. But enough to leave the branch. My breath caught in my throat. For a split second, I thought it would fall straight to the ground. The mother eagle moved, not to grab, but to match its descent. The eaglet caught air clumsily, dipped low, nearly touched earth, and then, somehow, corrected. It didn't soar. It survived the attempt. And that was enough. In that instant, every argument inside me went quiet. I understood something I should have understood years ago. You cannot prevent every fall. You can only stay close enough to matter. I turned back to the railroad men. If you need to take the south field, we'll talk, I said steadily. But that tree stands. The representative studied me for a long moment. You're asking us to redraw plans. I'm asking you to see what's already here. Silence stretched between us. Then, not dramatically, not generously, he nodded once. We'll review alternatives. Not a promise. But not a refusal. They mounted and left, dust rising behind them like nothing extraordinary had occurred. Nothing exploded. No victory cry. Just space. Above me, the eaglet landed awkwardly on a lower branch. Alive. Breathing. Learning. And that's when I heard it. Hoofbeats behind me. Slower than Tom's. Heavier. I didn't turn immediately. I was afraid to hope. Fence still crooked, a familiar voice said. Older now. Rougher. But the same. I turned. My son sat on a bay horse at the edge of the yard. No grand reunion. No running embrace. Just two people standing on ground that had cost them both something. You came, I said. He shrugged slightly. Heard you were stubborn as ever. I answered. Just not in the right direction. We stood in silence. Then he looked toward the cottonwood. That yours? He asked, nodding at the eaglet. No, I said. Just passing through. He gave a faint smile. That's how it should be. And that was it. No apology speech. No dramatic forgiveness. He dismounted and walked toward the broken fence without another word. Picked up a board. Set it into place. Stayed.
He didn't come back because he had to. He came back because he could.
Nothing outside looked different by evening. The railroad still had its maps. The fields still needed work. The winters would still come. But something inside me no longer clung so tightly. The eaglet made one more short flight before dusk. Clumsy. Honest. Free. And for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel the need to hold anything still. I simply stood there, steady enough that if something chose to return, it would find me here. Not guarding. Not gripping. Just home.